Hello, everybody. It is I, Mr. N, returning once again for some more reading awesomeness. You will probably notice that my voice sounds much better today. I went out and got some Claritin D. Brought in the big guns for my allergies today, so my voices should be much better today. So we are going to continue the story of Hank the Cowdog, the case of the missing cat. Now you may recall, when last we left Hank, he had succumbed to his darker instincts, and he had taken Pete the Barn Cat out, and he'd left him out in Coyote Country, and then he'd come back. He was beginning to notice that Pete was being missed around the ranch. So that is where we are picking up today.
Hank, I've got my stubbed tail back. I'm so happy.
Great. Glad to hear it. And I'm happy too, for slightly different reasons. With both of us happy, this should be a very happy evening. Sally Mae was standing out on the porch holding a plate of wonderful scraps and gazing off in the distance. All at once, she began calling Pete. She called his name over and over. And on every calling of his name, I flinched with happiness, you might say, and wished she would change the subject. The back door opened again, and out came little Alfred.
Did you find Petey?
I'm afraid he's gone, she said, combing the boy's hair with her fingers. Sometimes cats wander off and don't come back.
I miss old Pete. I hope he comes back.
I know, so do I. Maybe he will. Then both of them began calling Pete's name, and as if that wasn't bad enough, little Mr. Moan and Groan chimed in.
Gosh, I never thought I'd miss old Pete, but I do.
Think about all the extra scraps you'll get. Think about your new stubbed tail. Think about the clouds.
Okay, I'll try.
After a bit, Sally Mae stopped calling and gave a big sigh and came over to the yard gate where we were waiting. She scraped the fork over the plate and deposited a delicious-smelling pile of roast beef scraps on the ground in front of us. I guess you dogs get it all tonight, she said, and then she turned and went back into the house. Little Alfred followed her with his chin down on his chest. I turned to Drover. Well, this is true happiness, son. At last we have all the scraps to ourselves. Now, before you get any big ideas, let me point out that I get the larger portion. He sniffed the fragrant vapors that were rising from the scraps and, very strange. He shook his head.
You can have 'em all, Hank. I'm not very hungry.
How could you not be very hungry?
I don't know. Somehow food just doesn't seem as interesting when we can't fight over it with Pete.
Well, you just sit there and watch, and I'll... Funny, I'd kind of lost my appetite, too. I stood over the scraps and sniffed them, licked them, took a bite and rolled it around in my mouth. The exciting taste I'd expected to find just wasn't there.
It's not the same, is it, Hank?
What? He'd been watching me. I don't know what you're talking about. A tear rolled down his cheek and dripped off the end of his nose.
I wish old Pete would come back and fight with us. Gosh, we might starve to death without him.
I heaved a sigh and pushed myself up to my feet. All right, Drover, let's go see if we can find the stupid cat. All at once, he was jumping up and down.
Really, Hank? Honest, you mean it?
I'm doing it as a special favor for you. I want that understood right now. Let's move out. I figure we've got 1 hour of daylight left. And with that, we headed north toward the Caprock and launched a rescue mission to save the... I was still having a little trouble believing that this was really happening. Chapter 12. Happy endings aren't as simple as you might think. We zoomed past the mailbox and headed north. Drover broke the silence.
You don't reckon we might see any coyotes, do you?
Are you joking? He started laughing.
Yeah, I was just joking.
That was a good joke, Drover, because up in that rough country, the coyotes are as thick as fleas. All at once, it appeared that Drover suffered a blowout on his front left paw.
Boy, how did this old leg just went out on me, Hank? I was afraid that might happen. I never should have pushed it so hard.
Hurry up, son. This is a race against time. He was falling farther behind.
You better go on without me, Hank. I don't want to hold you back. I'll see you guys back at the house.
I didn't have time to mess with Drover. The seconds were ticking away, and with every tick of the clock, Pete the barn cat was coming closer to... I still couldn't believe I was doing this. I hit that big sand draw just east of the prairie dog town and followed it north to the base of the Cap Rock. Up ahead, I could see the lone hackberry tree where I dumped off, left him, delivered him, shall we say. Since I didn't know what I'd find there, I approached it with maximum caution. Some 25 yards out, I slowed to a walk and shifted into stealthy crouch mode. I eased up to a bluff and glanced around in all directions. I peered over the top and saw Pete the barn cat, surrounded by two hungry-looking coyotes who reminded me very much of two long-limbed, yellow-eyed, slack-jawed, utterly humorless cannibal brothers named Rip and Snort. Yes, it was Rip and Snort, and it had certainly been nice knowing old Pete, and I kind of regretted losing him after I'd gone to all the trouble of running up to the Cap Rock, because nobody takes cats away from Rip and Snort. I mean, you talk about guys who love to fight and eat and belch. Those two were the champs. Tough. Double tough. So I just lay there on top of the bluff and watched and listened. Now Pete was sitting and he appeared to be studying the same thing, staring at the ground. Snort stood nearby looking over Rip's shoulder. Well, now that was odd. All at once, Pete extended his right paw and tapped it on the ground 3 times and said, sorry, Rip, but you sure let that one slip on you. Snort began to laugh. Brother lose again. Brother got great big dumbness in head. Maybe now we stop and eat. His gaze drifted to Pete. Cat supper. Said Rip. Let's not rush into anything, said Pete, and you'll notice that he didn't hump up and hiss at those two guys, since that would have made him an instant meatball. Now let me see. I played Rip in one, I played Snort in one, but Rip and Snort haven't played each other. Huh, said Snort. Snort not waste time play Chesterless Chester with brother, 'cause brother just big dummy. Rip scowled and said, Oh, I'm not so sure about that, Pete said, flicking the end of his tail, and if you'll just watch the tail going back and forth, to and fro, lullaby and good blam! Snort clubbed Kitty over the head with his paw. Not try funny cat trick on Rip and Snort. Pete scraped himself off the ground, straightened his ears, and spit dirt out of his mouth. I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about. Talking about cat try to cheat, but Rip and Snort not fall for funny cheating cat trick. Now, cat move back. Let Rip and Snort play Chesterless Chester. Oh boy! Snort swatted Pete out of the way and sat down at the so-called board. Brother go first move. Said Rip, and suddenly we had 2 cannibals staring down at a blank area of dirt and given total concentration to... Total concentration? Hey, if they were so wrapped up in their... Creeping over the edge of the bluff and extending my body to its fully extended position, I closed my jaws around Pete's head and snatched him into the air.
he did a flip and landed on the ground on my side of the bluff. The second he landed, he humped up and bristled and drew back his paw to deliver his usual swat at my nose. Lucky for him, he caught himself just in the nicker of time.
My goodness, the cops are here.
That's right, Kitty. I've come to save your worthless carcass. Don't ask me why. But before I do any life-saving, I want to hear you say calf rope.
Calf rope? Well, now, ordinarily, cats don't...
Say it, Pete, or I'll throw you back with the cannibals.
I'm liking it better all the time. Calf rope. Now, let's get out of here.
Hop on my back and hang on. He sprang up on my back and we went zooming down the sand draw. We hadn't gone far when I heard a riot starting behind us. No doubt Rip and Snort had looked up from their checkerless checker game and figured out that they'd been conned by their supper. And they didn't sound too happy about it.
Stop, thief! Not leave with cat! Ranch dog in very big trouble now.
Yes, very big trouble indeed, which was a powerful incentive for me to stretch out my legs and use my incredible speed to move our deal from the Cap Rocks down to headquarters. I had just began to pull away from them when Pete turned around in the saddle, so to speak, and faced the back and began talking trash to the brothers.
You big galoots couldn't catch a flea on a grandpa's knee. Ha ha ha, ho ho ho, hee hee. I'll bet your mama wears old toe sack drawers.
Now, it seemed to me that Pete had a real short memory and real poor judgment, which I guess is standard equipment in your lower grades of cat, and the result was like throwing water on gasoline. Gasoline on water? Water on fire? Whatever it is. Anyway, the brothers got a sudden inspiration to stump a fresh mud hole in the middle of Pete's back, and here they came. Gasoline on fire! Now, Pete, do me a favor and shut your mouth, will ya? Fellers, if the chase had gone on another 100 yards, we might have been looking at the possibility of throwing baggage overboard to lighten the load, which would have definitely put my new friendship with the cat to a stern test. But just as the brothers were getting close enough to shorten my tail section, we reached the county road. A truck was coming along, and I shot the gap in front of him, made it with inches to spare, and the brothers had to give up the chase. We'd made it! By that time, we were within easy walking distance of ranch headquarters. I slowed to a walk and caught my breath and enjoyed the spectacle of a beautiful panhandle sunset. I mean, it was a magic moment. The wind had died to the merest whisper. The western sky had become a fireworks display of red and pink and orange, while off to the north, the Cap Rocks were sinking into blue and purple shadows. I had just pulled off a very impressive rescue mission and had escaped being mauled by the coyotes and had made peace with my very oldest and staunchest enemy. Just for a moment, it seemed that the whole world stopped what it was doing and joined in on a song to celebrate peace and happiness and friendship and the beautiful sunset. As I recall, it went a little something like this. Day is done, twilight's come, gone's the sun and comes the night. We pray for wisdom and for health and for light. Day is now over, the twilight's fallen, gone is the sunlight. We're left in the blackness of night. We're praying for courage and wisdom, and for our safe passage from darkness to light. Yes, sir, it was an evening to remember. Even Pete caught the feeling of it.
Well, Hanky, you've put me in a very awkward position. Since you saved me from the coyotes, I may be forced to say thank you.
Yep, you sure might.
Which cats don't like to say.
I've noticed.
And I might even have to start thinking of you as a friend. which really depresses me.
I know what you're saying, Pete. I mean, just think of all the years we've invested in a lousy relationship.
I know. All the nasty tricks and hateful names.
Right. And all the great fights we've had.
And now it's finished, Hanky. All gone.
Exactly. Wiped out by one thoughtless act of kindness.
Well, Hanky, we can always hope that it won't last.
With heavy hearts, we strolled into headquarters. As we were passing the yard gate, I noticed that Pete's head shot up and he said,
What? Oh, nothing, Hanky. Thanks for everything. And now you run along back to your gunny sack bed.
Well, that's sort of what I sniffed the air. Mercy. Unless I was badly mistaken, the air had just acquired the fragrance of roast beef. On second thought, Kitty, why don't you run along and find somebody's leg to rub?
Those scraps are mine, Hanky. I saw them first.
No, wrong, incorrect, and wrong. Those are my scraps. He humped his back. I growled. He hissed. I barked. He slapped me across the nose, and I made a snap at his tail, and all at once I remembered why I'd wanted to bump him off in the first place, and things were back to normal, and everyone was happy again. I guess. Fellers, if you can figure out what happiness is in this old life, well, you're a better dog than I am. I quit.
And that brings us to the end of Hank the Cowdog, the case of the missing cat. Thanks so much for joining me for this one, guys. Hank the Cowdog has always been one of my favorites. So, be sure to tune in tomorrow at 2 p.m. for more reading awesomeness. What will the book be? I don't know. It's a surprise. So, don't forget also that you can check out our other live programs, Toddler Time with Miss Becky, Stories with Sunny, and Creating with Constance. They do some pretty cool stuff. Also, remember that the libraries are now open for curbside service. They're not open to the public yet, but you can get curbside as of today, May 27th. And you can still access digital content through our digital library resources at sweetwaterlibraries.com. Thanks so much, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow.